Welcome back to Analysis, where we've been looking at recent events in Sri Lanka. My studio guests from the first half are still with me, and they're now joined by Jonathan Spencer, who's Professor of South Asian Language, Culture and Society at Edinburgh University. Welcome, Professor Spencer. In the first half of the programme, we looked at the immediate situation in Sri Lanka, and now we'd like to look at the background to these attacks. But first, let's take a quick look at a short report recorded at a demonstration outside 10 Downing Street yesterday.
I'm from Maludgama, this affected area in Sri Lanka, and we're here to tell the whole world. The majority of the Sri Lankans living in country, they're very peaceful, and especially Buddhists. There are few people among the Sri Lankans try to hate doing the hate campaign in Sri Lanka, and the government, especially the Mahinda Rajapaksa government, and they doing their backup. They could have stopped this violence in few seconds, and his brother, Defence Secretary, and Mahinda Rajapaksa, and doing this campaign against the government, against the Muslims in Sri Lanka, and they should stop organizations like Buddha Bala Sena and Sinhala Ravaya.
Hi, I'm Nicoletta, and I'm here to support all our brothers and sisters from Sri Lanka. I just let know about this event on social media, and I would like to say to everyone, come and support us. I want to say that it's not about that you are Muslim, Buddhist or Christian, because I'm not from Sri Lanka, I'm from Slovakia, Europe, and I would like to spread this message to everyone to know that these people are suffering just because of religious or just because they're Muslims, and I just want to say everyone to come and support us today. Jazakallah.
Professor Spencer, just let me come to you first. Welcome to the programme. Do you accept that the kind of view that was being voiced in that report, and we had a very similar kind of conclusion in the first half of the programme, that essentially we're seeing an extremist group which has some support from the authorities, which is magnifying its presence in Sri Lankan society?
It's a relatively small group, and certainly it has, in the past at least, had quite visible association with some key members of the government who have sort of appeared at its facilities and, given speeches apparently in support of it. But it's very, very murky what the exact connections are. It's widely believed in Sri Lanka that they're able to operate with the tacit support of at least elements within the government. How big it is a little difficult to say, but Buddha Bala Sena itself, the main group that's at the front of this recent event, is quite small, and its social base is quite specific too. It's very much based in the new middle-class suburbs of Colombo, and as you move away from the capital, it gets much less popular support as far as one can tell.
Well, that's an interesting point. I mean, because some analysts claim that you have often young people, sometimes orphans, who are becoming part of the monastic orders, who are providing some of the sort of drive behind this movement. Are you saying that in your view, it's different to that?
I certainly don't have any evidence to support that particular view. What there is clearly going on, and has been for some quite considerable time now, is a kind of struggle within the order of Buddhist monks, a struggle for who actually gets to speak with authority for them. The traditional authorities that politicians and other people have turned to are based in the old pre-colonial capital of Kandy. To some extent have been marginalized in recent years, and these new groups have put themselves forward, each claiming to speak for the Buddhist community, and doing that trick of you find with many very extreme right-wing groups, of trying to outbid each other in terms of playing kind of racist cards and things like that. So there is a longer story of struggle there, and this is a new group which is in many ways very different from the more traditional elements of the Sangha. And it has to be said, very, very strongly disliked by many traditional Buddhist monks. They're really as appalled by what's been going on as anybody else is.
Mustafa, let me get your view on that, because you know what Professor Spencer seems to be saying is it's largely based in some middle-class suburbs, that there's an element of a power struggle within inside the monastic order. Are those the things that you'd point to?
Yes, John. You know, what we see on the ground is, you know, traditionally all these Buddhist monks are very peace-loving. And these traditional Buddhist monks have no problem. They've been very close with all other ethnic groups, and they remain a peace-loving community, and they preach peace. But very unfortunately, this very small group of what I call is a politicized monks. So they have hijacked the peaceful religion of Buddhism. Right? They have hijacked it for their political reasons, I suppose. And then they are, for the political reasons, for them to survive, they're using these, their tactics, because it is easy to arouse this communalism, and for them to become popular. So this, within 2 years of time, you see this, they become very popular. They came from nowhere. Before 2012 June, we never heard about BBS. We've been living there for half a century now. I mean, me, as a person, as a Sri Lankan, but we never heard that. But what we hear is a peaceful Sri Lankan Sinhalese people and Sri Lankan Buddhist monks. I have been living among them in the southern part of Sri Lanka, where I was graduated from the university from Ruhuna. Then I lived in Anuradhapura. It was the previous capital of Sri Lanka. It's a religious capital of Sri Lanka. So I had all, friends and doctors, my colleagues. They're all peaceful, loving citizens. This is not the phase of Buddhism. This is a different phase of Buddhism.
So where has it come from? I mean, we get this rhetoric about saving the Sinhalese race and whatnot coming from BBS. Where has that suddenly come from?
Yeah, now what BBS and the other hate groups have been doing is to cash in on certain inner fears. So inner fears in the people, the Sinhala mindset. One thing that's coming up is they have actually, some of the analysts, analyze this situation as something, they consider the Sinhalese language as a language that is going to extinction, right? And even so is the Sinhala race. So they have the fear, because in the guise of 50 million Tamils in the neighboring Tamil Nadu, so it's making about 17 million Sinhala Buddhists a minority. And that's why the historians in Sri Lanka, they always consider the Sinhalese having a minority mindset because of these inner fears, and also some of the discrimination that happened during the colonial times. So therefore, the Buddha Sena has been trying to fear that after the Tamils, we extinguish Tamil threat. After this, in 2009, we won over them. The Tamils, not the Tigers. So and now it's a new enemy has come in, right, in the form of Muslims. And they are also cashing in on the Islamophobia, which is going all around the world. And they have ready messages, especially to the young minds, through the Facebook, which is very, very, dangerous.
Professor Spencer, there's a couple of points there. So this is a kind of almost I think Lukman was suggesting a kind of replacement hatred after the conflicts with the Tamils, and it's one that's found a kind of ready-made international Islamophobia available for use. Is that it? Is there perhaps also an economic dimension here, which we quite often look for in these cases?
If there is an economic dimension, it's perhaps not an obvious one. It would be more, I think, to do with the rapidly changing economy since the late 1970s in Sri Lanka, and the kind of liberalisation and, for want of a better word, globalisation of the economy. And so it's not about people getting poor, but it's about people getting insecure. It's people scrambling their way up into the middle classes and then being very worried about retaining their place in the middle class. So there's a kind of pervasive sense of insecurity, which does seem to be connected to the rise of some of these things. But what you actually have in the last few years is an extremely counterintuitive situation where the war is over, this extremely dangerous, scary militant group, the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam, is completely defeated once and for all. And you'd think everybody could kind of relax. And instead of that, suddenly you get this upsurge of new hate figures and new anxieties about other religious groups. But you can actually, if you go back a little bit from there, you can find through the latter years of the war that the extreme nationalists were shifting their attention already away from the LTTE, the Tamil groups, and shifting their attention to both Muslims and also Christians, in other words, other religious groups, as a source of a kind of existential threat to singular people, as your previous speaker said. And for an outsider, it's extremely difficult to understand the mindset of people when, they've won a war, they control the government, symbolically they control the country in every possible way. What is the source of this threat? It's very, very hard to get your head around that.
So are you suggesting, there's some writing about the area more generally, perhaps more located in analysis of Indonesia, perhaps, about the emergence of a new middle class connected to neoliberalism, and some kind of sense of dislocation there with older class structures? Is that perhaps something?
I think that is part of it. The other point of reference with Indonesia would be sort of 10, 15 years ago in Indonesia, at the end of the New Order period, the fall of Suharto, when you got outbreaks of religious violence in different parts of Indonesia in a period of 3 or 4 years. Much of it anti-Christian, sometimes anti-Muslim, depending on which part you were in. But that again seemed to be a period of kind of political instability. And what you have in Sri Lanka, curiously, you've got a regime in power that seems to be controlling everything, and yet everybody feels things are terribly, terribly unstable and unpredictable. So there's a sense of instability, even if it looks apparently to an outsider like a very stable situation.
Mustafa, do you think people are now mindful of parallels with Burma, where up to this point, at any rate, the violence of Buddhists against Muslims has been more bloody than so far in Sri Lanka? Is that something which people see as a sort of worrying portent?
Absolutely, yes, certainly. Because we have seen that this, Buddhu Balasena secretary, the monk Gnanasera, has visited Burma and has met the chief, the Time magazine published the terror phase of Buddhism, so that he has...
Buddhist terror.
Yeah, Buddhist terror. So he has met him personally, and he has invited him to come home to Sri Lanka. And we see that, how the carnage in Burma was not an overnight, incident. It was, that momentum was built up to reach to that extent. So I think what we see in Sri Lanka is we fear that whether this momentum is being built to come to, to that level. So what we want is, we don't want that momentum to be built and to explode as a carnage in another war. So we need peace. We need the prosperity of the country. The country needs to be developed. So we have just finished the 3 decades of war. So give us some breathing space to allow the country to develop. So only with the development of the prosperity, we need peace to prosper. So without peace, so why this, we don't understand the logic of why the government is allowing this small minority group to destroy the peace that we have, we were earning for this peace for the last 3 decades, and finally we found it. But now it is being again destroyed. So that we see a parallel, yes, certainly.
I mean, it was a very bloody. If it's a peace, it was a peace established through a great deal of bloodshed. Is that part of the problem?
No, I mean, I totally agree with him. But let me add this as well. Now, with regard to after the war, the people of Sri Lanka, especially the majority, right, Sinhalese, were having lots of hope, right, and they wanted a greater part of the fruits of the progress, which unfortunately did not happen. As he rightly pointed out, there was this establishment or the Mahinda regime, right, who got the most of these fruits, right. So as a result, they found that inequality, right, problem came into being. Then there was another fear, John, is, in next year, 2015, it's a century after the worst riots in Sri Lanka, which is called the Sinhala Muslim riots in 1815 or 1915, which, led to lots of things, bad feelings among the people against the Muslims. So this is going to be cashed in, and there are lots of messages that have come, not only from these hate groups, but even the front organization which is in the parliament, which is called the Hela Urumaya, the Heritage Sinhala Heritage Party, which has some MPs and lots of misinformation going on through them, right? Of course, more in a diplomatic sense, and they have been hinting at this so-called century, that's coming next year, and how the people are feeling. So they are trying to get that out of the Sinhala people, which is one of the worst fears, more than this, So I was wondering whether these things which is happening in Alutgama is some sort of a, rehearsal for that event that's going to come next year.
Well, just before, Jonathan Spencer, just before we'll leave this question of parallels with what's happening in Burma, let me just get your view on this. Is this something which Sri Lankans should be worried can escalate into the kind of scale of the problem that we've seen there?
There's no doubt it could escalate, and I think people are very, very worried. They have been for most of the last year about the way in which these relatively small and local but very unpleasant incidents could spread across the country. One very big question is at what point somebody at the top realizes that there's a need to put a lid on it. And there's no doubt that the authorities could put a lid on this very, very quickly. And it's also possible that they, not out of particularly high-mindedness, but just out of pure expediency, they'll realize it's not in anyone's interest to be catching headlines around the world like this, and they'll limit things. The Burma situation, there are some differences. The Rohingya people in Burma are geographically as well as economically much more marginal than the Muslim people in parts of Sri Lanka. Certainly, for example, in Colombo, where they're the single largest part of the population in the biggest city, and where they run many businesses, and they're very much part of the establishment and part of the political establishment too. And there are Muslims in the cabinet, albeit not the loudest voices a lot of the time. So there are resources that the community has that they can use to push back against some of this in a way which I think has not been the case in Burma. And so that would be different. But the possibility that this spirals out of control and that if there's enough violence that this might in the end provoke retaliatory violence from somebody or other, this is a real nightmare that people are very, very worried about.
Just let me ask you one other international parallel, and with Modi's election in India, are we seeing a sort of a rise of nationalist politics here?
It's hard not to see a pattern. It's true. I mean, India is so much bigger and therefore much more resistant to generalisation. So it's a bit like comparing Surrey with the United States or something in terms of scale. But certainly Indian friends that I've been talking to this week about events in Sri Lanka, and particularly about the social base of some of these new right-wing groups, do see strong parallels with the BJP. And this kind of combination of economic liberalisation with extreme xenophobia. So you compensate for opening up the economy by hammering some unfortunate section.
Well, Mustafa, that's an important point, isn't it? Because, typically what neoliberalism does is to strip out many elements that bind the community together. And perhaps what we're seeing here is a kind of a replacement for other social bonds with an extreme form of nationalism, at least by some people.
Sorry.
Often neoliberal economics is seen to strip out elements of traditional cultures or traditional social bonds, and a replacement for that can be extreme forms of nationalism and racism.
I think it's because in this particular case, there's this extreme element of racism and the nationalism is it has been there, it has been there in the country, but we find it in the recent years, it has been, given more acceptance and it been supported. So this is, in fact, is affecting the businesses, it's affecting the economies, it's affecting the traditional way of life in Sri Lanka. But I'm not sure whether it is, it's deviating from the traditional way of businesses, but I'm not very sure about that. Yeah.
What do you think on this question? Are we seeing a reaction to sort of neoliberal economics here?
Yeah, in the sense, it has to, if you look at what happened after independence, the Muslims, all the communities, the interplay of various communities, especially in the commerce, right, in the field of commerce, change, a lot of things, and there is inner fear that the Muslims are taking upper hand, and in business, and therefore, all the interactions, ways people do business and various is changing now. So as a result, it is this inner fears. Of course, I agree with you. This should have an effect on this. But my fear is after this government came into power, right? The so-called majoritarian views of the Sinhala Buddhists is being cashed in by these type of groups. Among the people who had not thought of that angle, right? Especially after the independence, where the independence was won. The British gave independence on the basis of safeguards to the minorities, right? In the Salisbury Constitution, and therefore that was a whole package given. And in 1972, the government, Sri Lankan government, abolished the Salisbury Constitution and even the safeguard which they had on the for the minorities, and they made Buddhism as the predominant religion of the country, as well as they actually removed that. So which actually thought the Tamils, as part of it, they thought that it was a betrayal, by the government, subsequent government. And to be quite honest, John, now if you look at history, right, various attempts that have been done by various governments, to solve this problem through various pacts. We had, Dudley Senanayake, Chelvanayagam Pact, and we had the Bandaranayake Chelvanayagam Pact, and 2000. This Chandrika Bandanayake government brought in a new constitution with all those, and the recent one was before the war ended, the Ranil Wickremesinghe UMP government, they brought in another type of. So all this has been scuttled by this, Sinhala Buddhist, usually the monk factor, right? They have been the fact, just to keep that. So this is the fear we have. It's not the ordinary, the predominant or the mainstream line single opinion. It's this which has been hijacked. They have been hijacked by this neo-colonial group.
And can I stop you there, because that's the end of tonight's episode of Analysis. I'd like to thank my guests in the studio and those who joined us on the line, and of course you at home for tuning in. Please do follow our discussions, and don't forget that you can follow us on Twitter. The address is on the screen now, and you can also keep up with us at the Islam Channel Current Affairs group on Facebook. But until next time, good night.